Dave Anderson here. You may remember me as the sweaty guy in the Surfcaster's Journal video, What's in My Canal Bag? But today I'm going to talk about the Canal Tide Chart and how to decipher it. I'm going to make this really simple. I don't think there's too many secrets left with timing your fishing at the canal, but if you're new to it or if you just don't feel like you have a full grasp on it, this should dial you in pretty quickly. So the basics of fishing at the canal are that you need to pay attention to when the current changes, not when the tide changes. And the reason why these current changes don't coincide with high and low tide is because the tides outside the east end and the west end are vastly different, both in timing and in height. So the east end tides, the Cape Cod Bay tides, can reach heights of more than 10 feet, while the tides in Buzzards Bay seldom, if ever, reach 5 feet. See, there's a major difference there. A lot more water is piling up outside the east end than what's happening outside the west end. Also, the tide timings are different. So out in Buzzards Bay, outside the west end, high tide is occurring about 2.5 hours on the average before the high tide outside the east end. So you can kind of picture how they're sort of chasing each other, and the sandwich tide, east end tide, is higher. So, they're sort of following each other, and the tide's running this way. And then Buzzards Bay reaches its height and starts to fall, but this one's still going up. So now this is increasing the speed because now the water at this end is rushing to fill the void left by the tide draining out of the west end. After a few hours, the tide in Buzzards Bay reaches low and then starts to come back up. This one's still coming down, and then they equalize. That's when that period of slack water happens, and that's also why, as the difference between the two starts to reduce, the tide slows down. So that's why that period of time before the turn of the tide can be so good for fishing. One, it's easier to fish because the current isn't moving so quickly, but also I think it makes it easier for the fish to feed. So that is like the target period as a canal fisherman. So the column that you're looking at on the tide chart reads, Railroad Bridge Current turns east. And if you want to plan your trip so that you have the best shot at getting in on these epic blitzes, then you want the AM, the morning current change, the morning east turn, to occur within 2 to 3 hours of sunrise. Historically, this is when these major blitzes happen. These tides occur around the moon. The current is the strongest. The tides are the highest and the lowest. And the belief is that these stronger tides draw more bait into the canal, and the fishing just erupts during these quote-unquote breaking tides. And that's really it. The only thing that I can add is that if you look at the sandwich column and you follow it across from the tide that you are eyeballing, and you see that there's a star next to the tide, or even better, a double star. These are minus tides. These are times when the tide is lower than the average low. And these double star tides, single star tides, they tend to produce the best fishing of each cycle of tides. So if you're seeing that, then your chances are even higher than they were just hitting a breaking tide. And that's really it. It's super easy. You're going to plan your trip for when that east turn occurs around sunrise. And if you see that double star tide in the sandwich column, all the better. So if you're traveling in from wherever, it makes it pretty easy. You just find that tide on the chart and plan your trip. And you're going to give yourself the best shot at getting in on some of these great hits. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee. It's been a little harder to predict over the last 5 years or so. But historically, that's when you want to be there. Good luck this year.